Here I am, a 45-year-old black veteran, attempting to settle into the lake cabin I had inherited. That's when a woman from the HOA, in her $80,000 BMW, phones the police, insisting that I'm clearly burglarizing the place. Apparently, in her flawless little world, black men are not supposed to own lakefront real estate. Let me set the scene for you. It's 2 in the afternoon on a tranquil Tuesday. The aroma of pine needles is potent in the air, and loons are calling to each other across the perfectly clear water. I'm Marcus, recently separated from a difficult marriage, and finally getting a bit of luck with this cabin left to me by my great-uncle Ezra. My IT consulting van is parked in the driveway as I carry in boxes when this blonde antagonist charges toward me as if her Botox is about to fail. What do you think you're doing to our neighborhood? I show her the deed. She doesn't even glance at it. I don't care what forged documents you have. You are not welcome here. The sound of gravel crunches under her designer shoes as she speed dials 911. Yes, there's a questionable man with a truck taking furniture from the Hendricks property. 20 minutes later, a pair of perplexed police officers are apologizing to me, while Brenda Whitmore, the seemingly eternal HOA president, shrieks about property values and undesirable elements. Her final remark as she struts away. Enjoy it while you can. Oh, woman, you are clueless about what you have just initiated. What would you do if the police were called on you for simply existing as a black person in the suburbs? Where are you all watching from? I need reassurance that I'm not the only one in this HOA predicament. Let me go back and explain who I am, because this tale makes much more sense when you realize who Brenda was truly challenging. I'm Marcus Thompson, age 45. I served 12 years in the Army before moving into IT consulting. Following a recent divorce, my ex-wife was awarded the house in Atlanta. I was left with the debt and weekend visits with my 2 teenagers, Jasmine and Kevin. Just as I was resigning myself to a lifetime of financial struggle, my great-uncle Ezra died and bequeathed me his lake cabin in rural Georgia. Uncle Ezra was the type of person who purchased waterfront land back in 1962 when no one else was interested. He acquired 2 acres of untouched wilderness for what a used car costs today. The cabin itself is a quintessential A-frame with cedar shingles that have weathered to a silver gray. It requires some attention, but it's built like a fortress, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water and a stone fireplace. The complete package. Serenity Cove is a small development with 47 houses situated around a spring-fed lake. It's mainly inhabited by retirees and weekend visitors from Atlanta. The sort of place where you greet everyone indoors are left unlocked. Or so I believed. Enter Brenda Whitmore, 52 years old. She has fresh blonde highlights, drives vehicles that cost more than the average annual salary, and has been the HOA president for 6 years straight. The fact that no one else wants the position should have been my first warning sign. Her husband, Roger, is employed at the local bank. He seems pleasant but is clearly intimidated by his wife. Having no children, Brenda governs the HOA as her private fiefdom. She is obsessed with maintaining standards. Mailboxes must be forest green, trash bins must be hidden from the street, and lawns cannot exceed 2.5 inches in height. She keeps a measuring tape in her BMW and is prepared to use it. On the second day of my new lakeside existence, I'm on the deck enjoying my morning coffee, hearing the soft sound of water lapping against the dock and inhaling the pure morning air scented with pine and promise. That's when I hear the sound of tires on the gravel drive. This time, Brenda gets out of a white Mercedes, holding a manila envelope as if it were a weapon. She's dressed in a tennis outfit that likely cost more than my monthly child support payment. Mr. Thompson, she says, making my name sound unpleasant. I have some issues to discuss. She presents me with a certified letter listing 15 infractions. An unpermitted shed from 1987, an unauthorized commercial vehicle, my work van, and unsightly equipment, a backup generator. The total in fines amounts to $2,850, with a 30-day deadline to comply or face legal proceedings. As I'm reading the document, the smell of her high-end perfume mingles with the lake breeze in a nauseating way. The sheer nerve is astonishing. Ma'am, I only moved in yesterday. The infractions were present before your arrival. The negligence of the previous owner does not absolve the current owner of responsibility. That afternoon, I looked up the county records. The shed was, in fact, properly permitted. My van is legally parked on my own land. The generator is an item recommended by the local power company for homes in rural locations. Every single alleged violation is either lawful or entirely fabricated. But the thing about bullies is they bank on your ignorance of your own rights. Some of my neighbors are cordial but anxious, Frank and Dorothy Casey. A delightful elderly couple next door. Wave and smile but avoid eye contact whenever Brenda is nearby. The Johnson family, a young couple with 2 children, appeared happy to meet me until Brenda visited them. Now, they rush indoors whenever I pass by. The only one seemingly unaffected is old Pete Rodriguez, a resident since the 1970s. He simply shakes his head and grumbles about that woman anytime Brenda's name is mentioned. That first night, as I lay in Uncle Ezra's old room listening to the sound of the water, I came to a realization. I wasn't just up against a control enthusiast. I was facing someone who viewed my very presence as a danger to her meticulously ordered universe. She had no clue who she was confronting. Brenda wasn't finished with her displays of power on day 3. I was on the deck sipping coffee. That initial taste is always enhanced by the morning mist on the water. When a white county truck pulled up my gravel driveway, a building inspector stepped out, looking as if he wished he were anywhere else. "Mr. Thompson? A complaint was filed yesterday concerning commercial activities at this location." I invited him inside and showed him my business empire. A laptop, a printer, and a cell phone on the kitchen table. The inspector was practically apologetic, glancing around as if he was embarrassed to be there. "Sir, I have to ask, have you been having problems with your HOA president?" He lowered his voice. "Someone has been very persistent about this property. They filed about a dozen complaints over the years about the previous owner as well." That gave me pause. The previous owner? "Yes, old Mr. Hendricks, a nice man, he documented everything. Said the same individual kept trying to have him evicted for violations that never existed." The inspector shook his head. "Just between us, I think she was hoping he'd eventually give up and sell." After he departed, my mind was racing. I went to the crawl space beneath the cabin. My flashlight beam pierced through the dusty air, which smelled of old lumber and rodent droppings. Uncle Ezra was a collector of everything, and I hit the jackpot. There were 3 banker's boxes filled with correspondence. 15 years of letters, threats from lawyers, certified mail receipts, and dozens of HOA violation notices, all bearing the same distinctive signature. Brenda Whitmore, President. The woman had been conducting a campaign of paperwork against Uncle Ezra since 2008. As I was sifting through this valuable discovery, my phone buzzed. It was Derek, my lawyer friend from Atlanta. It was $300 I couldn't really spare, but sometimes you have to invest money to ultimately save it. "Marcus, you mentioned this woman has been HOA president for 6 consecutive years. That's unusual. Most states mandate annual elections and financial disclosures to maintain legal status." I could hear him typing. "Let me look up the state business registry. One moment. Wow, dude, your HOA hasn't submitted the necessary paperwork since 2021. They're no longer even legally recognized." My heart began to race. I recalled reading that organizations forfeit their authority if they fail to maintain their registration. What does that mean exactly? It means that every fine they've imposed in the last 2 years is invalid. They have no legal authority to enforce any rules whatsoever. I sat there in Uncle Ezra's old armchair with legal papers strewn around me like confetti. When the realization struck me, this was why Uncle Ezra saved everything. He knew that one day, someone would require the ammunition to resist. That evening, as I was grilling some bass caught from the dock and enjoying the sounds of frogs and cicadas, Frank Casey materialized at the edge of our properties like a jumpy spy. "Marcus?" he whispered, glancing towards Brenda's house. Dorothy baked some cookies, chocolate chip. He passed me a plate that smelled like pure comfort. "She wanted you to know that woman did the same thing to the Johnsons last year." "What kind of thing?" "She complained to the county about their kids playing basketball. Said it was too noisy. She tried to fine them $2,000 for having a hoop in their own driveway." Frank's voice grew even quieter. Then, a week later, her real estate company sent them a letter, a lowball offer to help them find a more family-friendly location. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't about maintaining property standards or community peace. Brenda was operating a systematic extortion scheme. Harass residents until they break, then use her real estate license to acquire and resell their properties for a profit. Frank shuffled his feet on the pine needles. "Your uncle figured it out years ago. He said she had already forced out 3 families before he began keeping records. As Frank disappeared back into the darkness, I remained on my deck, listening to a beaver slap the water somewhere on the lake. The sound echoed off the hills like applause. Uncle Ezra hadn't just left me a cabin. He'd left me undeniable proof. But Brenda wasn't finished escalating. The next morning, she made a post in the neighborhood Facebook group, concerns about a new resident's activities affecting community safety and property values. It was just vague enough to be legally safe but specific enough to sow discord. There were 3 likes, all from accounts created that same day. Truly amateurish. I took screenshots of everything, documented the fake accounts, and began compiling a dossier that would have made my old Army intelligence unit proud. Every falsehood was cataloged, every instance of harassment timestamped. Brenda Whitmore believed she was playing a game of chess. She was about to find out that I learned strategy from people who played for keeps. Brenda's Facebook post was merely a prelude. 3 days later, I received a call from my largest IT client, a medical practice that had been my primary source of income since the divorce. Marcus, we've received some troubling information regarding your business practices. An anonymous tip suggested you might be operating without the proper licenses. My stomach sank. Dr. Martinez, I've been licensed for 8 years. You've personally seen my credentials. I know, it's likely baseless, but we must be cautious with HIPAA compliance. Perhaps we should temporarily suspend the contract until you resolve this. After I hung up, practically fuming, my phone rang again, and then again. 3 more clients had received anonymous tips about my business. Someone was actively trying to ruin my livelihood. But the anonymous tip game can be played by 2. I spent the afternoon looking into Georgia's real estate licensing laws. It turns out that agents who use aggressive solicitation methods or harass property owners can have their licenses suspended. There was even a complaint form available online. The following evening, I went to what Brenda termed an emergency HOA meeting at the community center. The building smelled of stale coffee and floor polish, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like agitated wasps. 12 residents attended, roughly half of the active community. Brenda stood at a folding table, addressing the room as if it were the UN Security Council instead of a group of retirees. We are here to discuss security issues related to our newest resident. She didn't use my name, but her gaze was fixed on me from across the room. I have drafted a petition to request a background investigation. Frank Casey raised his hand shyly. Brenda, what are the specific security concerns? Commercial activities in a residential zone, increased vehicle traffic, and unfamiliar individuals visiting at all hours. Each falsehood was delivered with the confidence of a prosecutor. I rose slowly, taking out my phone. Actually, let's discuss legal operations. Was everyone aware that this HOA has not filed the required state paperwork since 2021? The room fell silent, except for the buzzing fluorescent light. According to Georgia law, organizations that fail to maintain their registration lose their authority to enforce rules or collect dues. Every violation notice sent out in the last 2 years is legally void. I began distributing printouts of the state business registry search. Here is the evidence. Your HOA exists solely in Brenda's mind. Dorothy Casey gasped. But we paid our assessment fees last year. To an organization with no legal status, you might want to request receipts. Brenda's expression shifted through confusion, anger, and something resembling panic. These are minor clerical errors. The HOA has been operating continuously since. Since when? Show me the articles of incorporation, the board election records, the financial statements filed with the state. The mini twist came from an unforeseen source. Roger Whitmore, Brenda's typically quiet husband, cleared his throat from the back. Brenda, honey, didn't you tell me you were taking care of those filings? His voice was soft but carried in the silence. You said they were all current. Every head in the room turned to look between them. Brenda's perfectly maintained composure shattered like ice on a thawing lake. Roger, this isn't the time. Actually, it is. He stood up, looking weary in a way that seemed to go beyond just lack of sleep. Folks, I apologize for this situation. My wife has been overly zealous about community standards. I was unaware she wasn't keeping up with the proper documentation. After the meeting broke up in a series of awkward murmurs, Roger met me in the parking lot. The scent of honeysuckle was heavy in the warm evening air. Marcus, can we speak in private? We walked to the lake's edge, where the moonlight transformed the water into liquid silver. Roger kicked at the shoreline pebbles. "She's not a bad person," he said at last. "But she gets these ideas, about how things ought to be, and when reality doesn't align with her vision." His voice trailed off. "Roger, she tried to ruin my business. She filed false reports." He nodded dejectedly. "I know. She's been under a lot of strain. Financial issues. Her investment properties are not performing well. And she gets desperate when she's afraid." This was the real mini twist. Brenda wasn't acting from a place of strength. She was driven by fear. Financial strain can make people do foolish things. How desperate are we talking? Roger looked back toward the community center, where Brenda was still inside, likely planning her next move. Desperate enough to make mistakes, big ones? He walked away. His shoulders slumped like a man carrying a heavy, invisible burden. I stood there listening to the sounds of the night. Bullfrogs croaking, fish jumping. In the distance, the solitary cry of a screech owl. Uncle Ezra used to say, "The lake will speak to you if you know how to listen." Tonight, it was telling me that Brenda's house of cards was already collapsing. I just needed to figure out how to give gravity a little push. The next morning, I submitted the real estate license complaint, complete with documented proof of her harassment methods, not to destroy her, but to inform her that actions have repercussions. Then, I prepared to wait. In my experience, cornered animals are the ones that make the most significant errors. Brenda's subsequent action was a classic move from a desperate playbook. I was awakened at 6:00 a.m. by the sound of a diesel engine rumbling in my driveway. Through my bedroom window, I saw a man in coveralls hammering "no trespassing" signs into what I was fairly certain was my front yard. I quickly dressed and went outside, my bare feet crunching on the dew-covered pine needles. The air had that sharp morning coolness that makes you feel invigorated, provided you're not engaged in a property line dispute before your first coffee. "Morning," I called out. "Do you mind if I ask what you're up to?" The man looked up from his post-hole digger, sweat already forming on his brow despite the cool temperature. "A lady hired me to mark the HOA common areas, said there have been trespassing problems." "And what lady would that be?" "A blonde woman who drives a fancy car. Said she was the president or something." I took out my phone and showed him the property survey I had downloaded from the county records. "See this line? You're standing about 20 feet inside my property." His expression fell. "Oh, sorry, man." She showed me some map and said this was community land. He began to remove the signs. The lady seemed very certain about the boundaries. I'm sure she did. After he had gone, I walked the actual property lines with my survey printout. It turned out that my great-uncle owned a 50-foot strip of land on both sides of the private road leading into the community. This was information I had missed in all the chaos, but it suddenly felt extremely significant. That afternoon, I went to the county courthouse, a brick building that smelled of old paper and bureaucratic delay. The property records clerk, a woman who looked as if she had been filing deeds since the Civil War, helped me decipher what I was seeing. "Your great-uncle granted the road easement in 1987, she explained, her finger tracing the legal description. "But look at this clause right here. Easement is conditional upon the maintenance of neighborly relations and respect for the property owner's rights." I read it a second time. What does that mean, exactly? It means that if the people using the easement start causing trouble for the property owner, the easement can be legally revoked. She looked at me over her reading glasses. "Are you having neighbor problems, dear?" You could say that. Well, revoking an easement is a serious matter. It completely cuts off road access. Most people try to resolve things first. Walking back to my truck, the realization hit me with the force of a lightning strike. Brenda's house was at the end of that private road. Without the easement, she had no legal access. Her $850,000 lakeside home would become worthless overnight. "Uncle Ezra, you clever old man, you left me more than just a cabin. You left me a checkmate in a single move, but the game wasn't finished yet." That evening, as I was grilling chicken on my deck, I noticed something was wrong. The generator that keeps my essential systems running during power outages was completely out of fuel. I had filled it just 3 days prior, and it only operates during power failures. My security cameras. Yes, I installed those after the trespassing incident. Revealed the story at 3:17 a.m. A dark sedan approached my driveway with its headlights off. Someone got out, tampered with the generator, and then drove away. The license plate was obscured, but I recognized the silhouette. The next morning, a thunderstorm rolled in and cut power to half the county. My neighbor's backup systems kicked on. Mine remains silent, sabotaged, but I'm not some helpless urbanite. 12 years in the army taught me to be prepared for contingencies. I had a backup fuel supply stored in the shed, and within an hour, I was back online while Brenda was likely assuming I was stumbling around in the dark. The real surprise came later that day. While reviewing the surveillance footage, I noticed something else. My mailbox, which had been standing perfectly straight on Tuesday morning, was now tilted at a 15-degree angle. The newspaper I had left on my front steps was strewn across the yard like confetti, petty vandalism. The signature of someone who has lost control but isn't ready to admit defeat. It was time to increase the pressure. I documented everything. The fuel theft, the mailbox vandalism, the trespassing signs. Then I filed a formal complaint with the sheriff's department. Including the video evidence, I wasn't seeking an arrest, just creating a paper trail. Deputy Martinez, a no-nonsense woman with calloused hands and a kind demeanor, reviewed the footage on her tablet at my kitchen table. Mr. Thompson, this appears to be escalating harassment. Do you want to press charges? Not yet, but I want it on record. I have a feeling this is going to get worse before it gets better. She nodded in understanding. In a small community like this, people can get territorial, but theft and vandalism are crossing a line. She gave me her card. Call me directly if anything else occurs, day or night. That evening, I sat on my dock and watched the sun set over the water, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink that would put a postcard to shame. The scent of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney mingled with the clean smell of the rain-washed air. Frank Casey approached along the shoreline, moving cautiously on the wet rocks. Marcus, Dorothy is worried about you. We saw the police car earlier today. Just documenting some incidents. Frank, nothing to be concerned about. He sat down on the dock beside me, his old joints creaking like the wooden planks. That woman is getting desperate. Roger told me she's 2 months behind on her mortgage payments. This got my attention. Financial strain. Her investment properties aren't selling. Something about a soft market? Frank's voice dropped. Roger thinks she might be borrowing against their retirement funds to stay afloat. The pieces fell into place. Brenda wasn't just harassing me for sport. She needed properties to flip, and she needed them quickly. My cabin represented a potential profit she couldn't afford to lose. Frank, when someone is drowning, they'll grab onto anything to keep their head above water, even if it means pulling others down with them. He nodded grimly. Just be careful, son. Desperate people do dangerous things. As Frank returned home, I sat in the growing darkness, listening to the night symphony. Frogs, cicadas, the distant call of a night heron. Brenda was escalating because she was out of options, which meant her next move would be her biggest mistake yet, and I was ready for it. The critical discovery came from the most unlikely source. Uncle Ezra's old recipe box. I was clearing out the kitchen pantry, discovering canned goods that had expired during the Obama years, when I accidentally knocked over a wooden recipe box that was hidden behind a flour canister. Recipe cards scattered across the linoleum floor like large pieces of confetti, and that's when I saw it, a sealed envelope with the words, "For whoever comes after me," written in Uncle Ezra's shaky hand. My hands were literally shaking as I opened it. The letter inside was dated just 3 months before his passing. If you're reading this, it means Brenda Whitmore is likely causing you problems. She has been trying to get this property for 15 years, and I have the proof. Look for a metal box under the loose floorboard in the bedroom closet. It's all in there. The true story of what she has been doing to the people around here. The floorboard creaked like a rusty hinge as I lifted it. Inside the metal box, wrapped in plastic bags as if it were evidence from a crime scene, were photographs, bank statements, and a hand-drawn map of the community with houses marked in different colors. Red X's indicated 5 properties. The Henderson's place was sold in 2019 after a series of mysterious septic system failures. The Williams family left after their teenage son was repeatedly fined for noise violations from practicing his guitar. The elderly Kowalski couple moved to an assisted living facility after Brenda reported them for unsafe living conditions. Each Red X represented a family that Brenda had systematically harassed until they sold their home. Every property was then bought by Lakeshore Realty, Brenda's company, for 20 to 30% below market value and resold within 6 months. But Uncle Ezra had found something more. There were bank records showing that Brenda's investment plan was failing miserably. She had leveraged everything: her house, Roger's retirement savings, and even borrowed against their life insurance. to finance property flips that were not selling. According to Uncle Ezra's notes, she owed $47,000 in back taxes on her investment properties. Her real estate license had 3 formal complaints filed against it for aggressive solicitation. She was losing money faster than she could acquire new properties to sell. The final piece of the puzzle hit me like a physical blow. It was a copy of a desperate letter Brenda had sent to Uncle Ezra just weeks before he died. Mr. Hendricks, I am prepared to offer you $180,000 for your property, which is an extremely generous offer given the extensive repairs required. I can have cash available by Friday if you sign the enclosed purchase agreement. This offer will expire in 48 hours, and I cannot guarantee that future opportunities will be as advantageous. The market value for Uncle Ezra's property was at least $420,000. She wasn't just a controlling HOA president. She was running a systematic extortion operation, targeting vulnerable residents to fuel her failing investment addiction, and now she was on the verge of financial collapse if she couldn't acquire and flip properties quickly enough to cover her debts. I was sitting on Uncle Ezra's bedroom floor, surrounded by evidence of a 15-year crime spree. When my phone vibrated, it was a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Meet me at Rusty's Diner on Highway 9. Come by yourself, R. Roger." 30 minutes later, I was sliding into a cracked vinyl booth across from Brenda's husband. He looked as if he hadn't slept in weeks, with bloodshot eyes, stubble, and a wrinkled shirt. The diner smelled of bacon grease and desperation, which seemed strangely fitting. "She doesn't know I'm here," he began without any preamble. "If she finds out," he shook his head, stirring sugar into his coffee with unsteady hands. "Roger, I know about the investment properties, the debt, the harassment scheme." His face turned pale. "How much do you know?" "Everything." Uncle Ezra documented it all. Roger closed his eyes as if he were in physical pain. "I tried to stop her years ago when it started getting out of control, but she said we were in too deep to back out. She kept saying that just one more flip would solve everything." "How bad is it?" "We're 3 months away from losing it all. The house, my retirement, her business license. She's borrowed against policies that don't even exist anymore." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Marcus, she's talking about doing something desperate. Something that would make you have to sell." The coffee in my cup suddenly tasted bitter. "What kind of desperate?" "I don't have the specifics, but she's been looking into insurance claims and talking to contractors about accidental property damage. She thinks that if your cabin becomes uninhabitable, you'll accept a quick cash offer and leave." The gravity of the situation settled over me like a heavy blanket. Brenda wasn't just harassing me. She was planning to destroy my home. But Roger's confession gave me something more valuable than evidence. It gave me leverage. "Roger, what if I told you there was a way to resolve this without ruining your lives?" He looked up, a glimmer of hope in his tired eyes like a flickering candle. "The road easement to your house passes through my property. One legal document, and Brenda's house becomes landlocked and worthless." The implications hit him instantly. "You would do that only if she forces me to, but if she backs off completely and permanently, the easement will remain. You keep your home, she keeps her license, and everyone moves on." Roger slumped back in the booth like a man who had finally found a place to set down a crushing burden. "What do you need me to do?" Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first raindrops began to fall on the diner's windows. A storm was approaching, but for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I wasn't the one who needed to worry about getting caught in it. The command center was Uncle Ezra's dining table, now covered with legal papers, property surveys, and enough coffee cups to fuel a small battalion. The aroma of freshly brewed dark roast mingled with the scent of old documents as I gathered my team for what we in the military call mission planning. Derek drove down from Atlanta that weekend, his laptop bags over his shoulder as if he were marching into combat. Which, in a way, he was. "Marcus, this easement situation is a thing of beauty," he said, spreading the original 1987 agreement on the table. "Your great-uncle was either a psychic or a paranoid genius, but this good neighbor clause is airtight. Any consistent pattern of harassment gives you the legal basis for revocation." "How do we legally prove harassment?" "The documentation you already have, plus witness testimony. But here's the best part. You don't have to prove it in court. Easement revocation is an administrative process. You file the paperwork, provide the evidence, and it's done." Frank Casey came over from next door, carrying Dorothy's homemade cinnamon rolls, which smelled divine and tasted even better. At 73, Frank possessed the mind of an engineer and the historical knowledge of someone who had watched this community grow for decades. I surveyed half of these properties back in the 80s. He told us, adjusting his glasses to examine the boundary maps. Your uncle was smart to keep that strip of land for the road. Most developers would have given it to the community to avoid maintenance costs. What about alternative access to Brenda's house? Frank shook his head. There are wetlands on 3 sides and your property on the 4th. Environmental permits for a new road would take years to obtain. If they're even possible, that woman has backed herself into a corner. Dorothy arrived with a casserole that filled the cabin with the comforting scent of home-cooked food. But she wasn't just there to cook. It turned out the retired school principal had been quietly documenting the HOA's misdeeds for years. I kept copies of every illegal fee notice, every bogus violation, she explained, pulling a manila folder from her purse that was thicker than a phone book. I figured someday we would need the evidence. Brenda collected over $30,000 in assessment fees, without any legal authority. The 4th member of our ad hoc council arrived on Sunday morning, Jake Morrison, a local contractor who looked like he could arm wrestle bulldozers for sport. His work truck sounded like a diesel dragon as it rumbled up my driveway, shattering the morning quiet. Heard you might need some security upgrades, Jake said, unloading enough lumber to build a small house. Frank told me about the situation. That woman has been bad for business around here for years. How so? She scares off new residents and lowers property values with her harassment. Bad HOAs are like a cancer in a community. He began measuring my windows for security shutters. Plus, your uncle was good to me. He gave me work when I was just starting out. By Sunday evening, we had a comprehensive strategy that addressed every angle. Legally, Derek was preparing the easement revocation paperwork, which required a 30-day notice before it could be implemented. We were also filing complaints with the state real estate board, documenting Brenda's harassment tactics. Not to revoke her license, but to create leverage for security. Jake was installing motion-activated cameras around the property perimeter, along with reinforced locks and window security. If Brenda escalated to property damage, we would have evidence that would hold up in court. From a community standpoint, Dorothy was organizing informal neighborhood meetings to inform residents of their rights. It turned out that most people were unaware the HOA was legally powerless, and several families wanted refunds for the fees they had paid. Financially, we had documented Brenda's debt situation through public records, property tax liens, missed mortgage payments, and failed investment properties, all public information that revealed her desperation. The brilliant part of our plan wasn't about revenge. It was about offering Brenda a way out with her dignity intact. If she stopped the harassment, acknowledged the HOA's legal issues, and helped transition to a voluntary neighborhood association, the road easement would remain in place, and her house would keep its value. Derek called it mutually assured de-escalation. Everyone would save face, keep their property, and move on. But what if she doesn't accept the offer? Dorothy asked, refilling coffee cups as evening shadows stretched across the lake. Then we moved to Plan B, I replied, tapping the easement revocation paperwork. Her house becomes landlocked, unsellable, and worthless. Sometimes the most effective weapon is the one you never have to use. Frank nodded in approval. Your uncle would be proud. He always said the best victories are the ones where no one has to lose everything. As my team left into the Sunday evening twilight, I sat on the deck, listening to the familiar sounds of frogs and night birds. The air smelled of honeysuckle and potential. Roger had been sending me updates. Brenda was becoming more erratic, talking about final solutions and teaching that man a lesson he won't forget. She had borrowed another $15,000 against their home equity to finance some mysterious project. We were prepared for whatever she was planning. The camera systems were recording 24/7, the neighbors were aware and supportive, and the legal documents were ready for immediate filing. But I hoped it wouldn't come to that. Cornered animals are dangerous, and Brenda Whitmore was definitely feeling cornered. The next phase of her desperation was about to start. The question was whether she would take the exit ramp we were offering or drive straight off a cliff. Either way, I was prepared. Brenda's desperation reached new heights on a Tuesday that began as a perfectly normal day. I was enjoying my morning coffee, watching a great blue heron hunt for fish in the shallow water, when my phone suddenly lit up with notifications. 23 missed calls, 17 voicemails, and a flood of texts that made my blood run cold. The fraudulent property management company called itself Southeast Asset Recovery. It had a professional website, official-looking letterhead. The whole package. Their first move was to place a lien on my cabin for unpaid community maintenance fees totaling $18,000. As I was reading the official-looking document, my hands shaking with anger, Derek called back. "Marcus, this is sophisticated fraud. They filed paperwork with the county claiming your property owes back assessments to a management company that didn't exist 3 weeks ago." His voice was tense with frustration. "Whoever is behind this knows just enough about the law to be dangerous. How is this possible? It would take someone with real estate knowledge, access to legal forms, and enough desperation to commit multiple felonies." Derek paused. "The good news is that filing fake liens is a serious federal crime. The bad news is that until we resolve this, you won't be able to sell or refinance your property." While I was dealing with that shock, Brenda launched her social media attack. The Serenity Cove Facebook group was flooded with posts about suspicious activity at my property. There were fake photos showing construction equipment that was never there and claims that I was planning to subdivide the land and build rental cabins. The posts were carefully crafted to trigger every suburban fear. Declining property values, increased traffic, and a loss of community character. Within hours, she had convinced half the neighborhood that I was some kind of developer planning to turn their peaceful lake into a commercial resort. My phone rang nonstop with calls from concerned neighbors, confused county officials, and even a reporter from the local paper asking about my development plans. Each call required 20 minutes of explanation, showing documents to prove a negative, but Brenda wasn't finished. That evening, my security cameras captured something that made my skin crawl. A dark sedan with Georgia plates circled my property 4 times between 11 p.m. and midnight. On the final pass, someone got out and did something near my generator. The next morning, I discovered sugar in the gas tank. A classic act of sabotage that would have ruined the engine if I had started it without checking. But Uncle Ezra's cautious nature had rubbed off on me, and I had developed the habit of checking the fuel and oil levels every few days. Jake Morrison arrived 20 minutes after I called him, his diesel truck rumbling like controlled thunder. The smell of coffee from his thermos mixed with the morning lake air as he inspected the generator. "Sugar in the gas tank is mostly a Hollywood myth," he explained, draining the contaminated fuel into a container. "But it will clog up the fuel lines and cause expensive repairs. Someone wanted to hurt you without getting caught. Is there any way to prove who did it? Your cameras caught the car, right? That's evidence, plus this level of escalation suggests that someone is getting desperate." Jake's weathered face showed concern. "Marcus, people who escalate to property damage don't usually stop there." He was right, the pattern was textbook. Harassment, legal threats, sabotage, what would come next? I had seen this progression in domestic violence cases, workplace conflicts, and neighborhood disputes that ended in tragedy. It was time to call in professional help. Deputy Martinez arrived that afternoon, her patrol car kicking up dust as she drove up my gravel driveway. She was all business, taking photos, documenting evidence, and asking the kind of detailed questions that suggested she had seen this escalation pattern before. "Mr. Thompson, I'm going to be direct with you, whoever is doing this is escalating quickly. Fake liens, property sabotage, surveillance. This is no longer an amateur operation. What do you recommend? Legally, we have enough for harassment charges, possibly criminal mischief, but a prosecution won't happen overnight, and it might make things worse in the short term." She studied the security footage on her tablet. "Do you have somewhere safe you can go for a few days while we sort this out?" I almost laughed. "Deputy, this is my home. I'm not going to be run off by some wannabe property flipper having a midlife crisis." She nodded in understanding. "Then we'll do this the hard way. I'll increase patrols and put a watch on your property. You keep documenting everything, don't engage directly, and call me immediately if anything else happens." That evening brought an unexpected turn of events. Roger Whitmore appeared at my back door like a ghost, looking around nervously before coming inside. The man had lost 20 pounds since I first met him, and stress was etched into every line of his face. "She's completely lost it," he whispered, accepting a cup of coffee with slightly trembling hands. "She spent 15 grand on some business consultant who's helping her file legal papers. She's talking about hiring private investigators, maybe even physical solutions." Physical solutions. She mentioned contractors who do specialized property remediation. I think she's talking about making your cabin uninhabitable. Roger's voice cracked. Marcus, I'm afraid of what she might do. This isn't the woman I married. The coffee suddenly tasted like ash. We were past harassment, past legal games, past rational negotiation. Brenda was entering a territory where desperation overrode judgment, where people convince themselves that extreme actions are justified by extreme circumstances. Roger, I need you to document everything she's planning, dates, names, amounts paid. Can you do that? He nodded dejectedly. I've been keeping records, hiding them in my tackle box. If something happens to you, if she goes too far, his voice trailed off. Nothing is going to happen to me. But if she escalates further, I'm going to end this permanently. After Roger left, I sat on my deck in the growing darkness, listening to the familiar night sounds of the lake. Somewhere across the water, a loon called out with that haunting voice that sounds like loneliness made audible. Tomorrow, I'm filing the easement revocation paperwork, 30-day notice. Then Brenda's house will become legally inaccessible. It's the nuclear option. But she's forced my hand. The time for playing defense is over. It's time to remind Brenda Whitmore that desperate people aren't the only ones who can escalate. The fake emergency call was received at 3:47 a.m. on a Wednesday that will forever be etched in my memory. I was jolted awake by the sound of diesel engines and flashing lights that cut through my bedroom curtains like angry red lightning. 6 sheriff's deputies, a bomb squad van, and enough firepower to invade a small country were all present because someone had called in an anonymous tip about a disturbed veteran stockpiling weapons and making threats against the community. I stumbled onto my front porch in boxers and a t-shirt, with my hands visible, moving slowly as you do when you're black and surrounded by nervous police officers at 4:00 a.m. The air was thick with the smell of diesel exhaust and adrenaline. Marcus Thompson? The lead deputy's voice was professional but tense. We received a report about weapons and potential terrorist activity at this address. Deputy, I'm a veteran with legally owned firearms that are locked in a safe. You're welcome to check my permits. I kept my voice calm, even though my heart was hammering like a woodpecker on espresso. This sounds like another false report from my neighbor. 3 hours later, after they had searched every inch of my cabin and found nothing more dangerous than a kitchen knife and my legally registered handgun, Deputy Martinez pulled me aside. Marcus, whoever called this in knew specific details about your military service, your consulting work, and even your divorce records. This was not random harassment. Her face was grim in the morning light. Someone is doing serious research on you, trying to build a case that you're dangerous. Is there any way to trace the call? It was a burner phone. The call was made from a gas station 30 miles away, but the details they provided suggest that this had to come from someone with access to private databases. The implications hit me like a splash of cold water. Brenda wasn't just desperate. She had gone full private investigator, digging into my background and looking for anything she could use against me. While I was dealing with the aftermath of the fake weapons report, Brenda launched her media campaign. The local newspaper received an anonymous tip about a troubled veteran with a history of violence. It was completely fabricated, but the damage was done before the editor could verify the claims. My phone started ringing with calls from reporters, neighbors, and even my ex-wife, asking if I was having episodes again. The story spread through social media like wildfire. Armed veteran under investigation in Lake Community. None of it was true, but the truth doesn't matter when fear takes hold of people. My IT consulting clients began to cancel their contracts. The medical practice that had been my biggest account sent a terse email about reputational concerns and patient safety protocols. 15 years of building professional credibility were wiped out by a single anonymous phone call. But Brenda's biggest mistake was underestimating how well I had prepared for this moment. Every fake report, every malicious lie, every attempt at character assassination was documented with military precision, timestamps, screenshot evidence, witness statements. Derek was building a federal case for stalking, harassment, and defamation that could put Brenda in prison for years. The community's response surprised everyone, including me. Dorothy Casey organized a Coffee and Clarity meeting at the community center, inviting every resident to hear the actual facts instead of Facebook rumors. 32 people showed up, the largest community gathering in years. The building smelled of fresh coffee and nervous energy as Dorothy stood at a folding table covered with documents. Folks, We've been living with systematic harassment for years, and it's time to face the truth about what's been happening in our community. She presented evidence of Brenda's illegal fee collections, the fake HOA registrations, and the documented pattern of targeting elderly and minority residents. Frank Casey provided surveying records showing that property boundary disputes had been fabricated from thin air. The Johnson family, who had been avoiding me since Brenda's whisper campaign began, stood up to apologize. "We were scared," Mrs. Johnson admitted, her voice shaking. "Brenda told us Marcus was dangerous, that our kids weren't safe, but after seeing this evidence," she gestured toward the documents, "we realize we've been manipulated by someone who profits from our fear." The tide turned completely when Roger Whitmore appeared at the back of the room, carrying a cardboard box that looked as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. "I have something to add," he announced, his voice barely above a whisper. "Documentation of everything my wife has done over the past 5 years. There were bank records showing payments to private investigators, contracts with fake property management companies, and email correspondence planning harassment campaigns against multiple residents. The evidence was overwhelming and damning." "She's not well," Roger continued, with tears streaming down his face. "The financial pressure broke something inside her, and I didn't know how to stop it, but I can't let her destroy innocent people to save our house." The room fell silent, except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and someone quietly crying. After the meeting, I found myself surrounded by neighbors offering support, apologies, and help with anything I needed. The community that had been fractured by years of fear and manipulation was coming together around the simple truth that nobody deserved what Brenda had put me through. But Brenda was not finished that night. My security cameras caught her car parked across the street from 11:00 p.m. to 2:00 a.m. She was just sitting there with the engine running as if she were working up. The courage for something final. The next morning brought the last escalation. A process server was at my door with papers for a restraining order. Brenda was claiming that I had threatened her at the community meeting, that I was stalking her family, and that she feared for her safety. All lies, but legally binding lies that could restrict my access to my own property. Derek drove down that afternoon with his briefcase in hand and a fire in his eyes. "Marcus, she's throwing everything at the wall, hoping something will stick. But she just made her biggest mistake." "How so?" "Filing a false restraining order is perjury, combined with the fake emergency calls, the fabricated liens, and the harassment campaign. We have her on multiple felonies." He spread the legal documents across my kitchen table. "It's time to end this permanently." That evening, I sat on my deck, watching the sun set over the lake, painting the water in shades of gold and orange that no camera could capture. The air smelled of wood smoke from someone's fireplace, mixed with the clean scent of water and possibility. Tomorrow, we would file everything. The easement revocation, the federal harassment charges, the defamation lawsuit. These were nuclear options, but Brenda had forced us into this corner with her escalating desperation. Part of me felt sorry. For her, financial pressure can break anyone, making them do things they never imagined possible. But sympathy ends when someone tries to destroy your life to save their own. The loons were calling across the water, their haunting voices echoing off the hills like the ghosts of all the peaceful evenings Brenda's harassment had stolen from me. It was time to take them back. The monthly HOA meeting on October 15th will be remembered in Serenity Cove's history as the night everything changed. The news had spread through the community like wildfire. This was not going to be another dull discussion about mailbox colors and lawn height violations. The community center parking lot was full by 6:45 p.m. 15 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to start, there were cars I had never seen before, neighbors who hadn't been to a meeting in years, and even some people from the next community over who had heard about our situation through the local grapevine. Inside, the usual smell of old coffee and floor wax was replaced by a sense of nervous energy and sharp anticipation. 43 people were packed into a space designed for 20, with folding chairs arranged in rows facing Brenda's usual table at the front. But tonight, the power dynamics were different. Derek sat in the front row, his briefcase at his feet like a loaded weapon. Deputy Martinez stood near the back door, officially observing but really there in case things got out of hand. Sarah Casey from the local newspaper had her recorder app running, thanks to Dorothy's invitation, ensuring that whatever happened that night would become a public record. Brenda entered at exactly 7:00 p.m., With Roger trailing behind her like a defeated shadow, she looked different, thinner, more fragile. Her designer clothes unable to hide the stressed lines around her eyes, but her voice was steady as she called the meeting to order. Thank you all for coming to address the ongoing security concerns affecting our community. I almost laughed. Security concerns? As if I were some kind of terrorist threat instead of a man who just wanted to drink his coffee on his deck in peace. As you know, we've had ongoing issues with a new resident whose activities have raised serious questions about community safety and property values, she said, gesturing toward a manila folder thick with fabricated evidence. Tonight, I'm proposing an emergency assessment of $5,000 per household to fund enhanced security measures. The room erupted. $5,000 was a mortgage payment for most of these retirees. Voices overlapped in confusion and anger until Frank Casey stood up, using his surveyor's authority to command attention. Brenda, before we discuss assessments, perhaps we should discuss legal authority, specifically whether this HOA has any legal standing to collect fees or enforce rules. Brenda's confident facade wavered. Frank, these are minor administrative issues that don't affect. Actually, they do? I stood up slowly, feeling 43 pairs of eyes on me. Because as of this morning, I filed formal paperwork to revoke the road easement that provides access to your house. The room went completely silent. You could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, someone's stomach rumbling, the distant sound of traffic on Highway 9. What that means? I continued, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence, is that in 30 days, you will have no legal right to use the road that leads to your property. Your house will become landlocked and worthless. Brenda's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and raw panic. You can't do that. That's illegal. Derek stood up, his briefcase clicking open with the sound of inevitability. Actually, it's completely legal. The original easement agreement contained a good neighbor clause that allows for revocation in cases of harassment or intimidation of the property owner. He began to pull out documents, spreading them on the table like playing cards, which brings us to the extensive evidence of systematic harassment, including fake emergency calls, fraudulent liens, property sabotage, and defamation campaigns. This is ridiculous. Brenda's voice cracked like thin ice. Marcus Thompson is a disturbed individual who has been threatening our entire community. That's when Dorothy Casey stood up, her retired principal's voice cutting through the chaos like a school bell. Brenda Whitmore, I have sat quietly for 5 years while you terrorized this community. No more? She opened her own folder, which was thick with documentation. Ladies and gentlemen, here is a list of illegal fees this woman collected from a legally defunct HO, over $30,000 in unauthorized assessments. Frank Casey added his voice to the chorus. Property surveys showing fabricated boundary disputes designed to intimidate homeowners into selling below market value. The Johnson family stood up together. Harassment of our children. Threats against our family for the crime of befriending our neighbor. One by one, residents stood up to share their stories, years of intimidation, bogus violation notices, and legal threats over non-existent rules. The community that had been silenced by fear was finally finding its voice. But the knockout punch came from the most unexpected source. Roger Whitmore stood up in the back of the room, a cardboard box in his hands as if he were carrying evidence from a crime scene. I have bank records showing payments to fake property management companies, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Email correspondence planning harassment campaigns, financial documents proving that my wife has been running an extortion scheme for years. He walked to the front of the room, each step echoing in the absolute silence. She borrowed $57,000 against our house to fund this operation. 3 families have already been driven out by her tactics. Marcus was supposed to be the 4th. Brenda's composure finally shattered completely. Roger, you son of a how dare you! Enough! The voice came from Deputy Martinez, who stepped forward with handcuffs already in hand. Ma'am, based on the evidence presented tonight and the complaints filed this week, you're under arrest for filing false police reports, harassment, and fraud. But I held up my hand, stopping the deputy mid-stride. The room held its breath. Actually, deputy, I'd like to make a different proposal. I looked directly at Brenda, seeing not a monster, but a broken woman who had let desperation override her humanity. Here's the deal. You apologize to this community for years of harassment. You help us establish a legitimate neighborhood association with term limits and financial transparency. You stop all legal actions against me and other residents. I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. In return, the road easement stays in place. You keep your house, your freedom, and whatever dignity you have left. The room erupted again, but this time with voices of support. Take the deal, Brenda. It's more than you deserve. Think about Roger. Brenda looked around the room at faces that had once feared her, now showing something that might have been pity. Her empire of intimidation had crumbled in a single evening, but I was offering her a way to walk away from the rubble. She signed the agreement with shaking hands, her signature barely legible through what might have been tears or just defeat. As people filed out into the October evening, the mood was strange, not quite a celebration, more like relief after a long illness finally breaks. The community center smelled of freedom and new beginnings. Frank Casey shook my hand at the door. Your uncle would be proud, son. You found a way to win without destroying anyone. Deputy Martinez nodded approvingly. Sometimes the best justice is the kind that lets everyone go home. Outside, the lake reflected a canopy of stars, and for the first time in months, the night sound seemed peaceful instead of ominous. The war was over. Now came the harder work of healing. 6 months later, I find myself sitting on my deck, watching the sunrise paint the lake in liquid gold. Steam curls up from my coffee mug into the crisp morning air. The sound of loons calling across the water has become my daily meditation. A hauntingly beautiful voice that sounds like peace made audible. The cabin renovation evolved into something magical. Jake Morrison's crew appeared every weekend, refusing payment but demolishing Dorothy's apple pies and enough beer to float a small boat. What began as security improvements transformed into a full restoration that honored Uncle Ezra's vision while adding touches that make it truly my own. My kids now visit every other weekend, and the change in them is beautiful to witness. Kevin has become a fishing prodigy under Frank Casey's patient guidance, while Jasmine treats the place like her personal art studio, painting watercolors of herons and sunsets that capture something I never could with words. The community's metamorphosis has been breathtaking. Our voluntary neighborhood association meets monthly, but these gatherings feel more like family reunions. Frank Casey is serving as our first elected president. 1-year terms. No exceptions. Dorothy's newsletter now features fishing reports and recipes instead of legal threats. The lake itself seems to have exhaled in relief. Our cleanup day removed decades of accumulated junk from the shoreline. We've built fish habitat structures, planted native vegetation, and brought back the ecosystem that urban development had slowly choked. Property values have increased by 15% this year as word spreads about our cooperative lake community. Brenda and Roger moved to North Carolina in February, their house selling for full market value thanks to the preserved road access. Roger stopped by before they left, looking healthier than I had seen him in years. She's getting help, he told me, his voice carrying hope instead of defeat. Therapy, financial counseling, the pressure broke something in her, but she's putting the pieces back together. I nodded in understanding. Desperation can turn anyone into their worst self. True character is revealed when you get the chance to start over. The Ezra Hendricks Memorial Scholarship now provides $2,000 annually to students studying environmental science. Our Lake Unity Festival brings together 3 communities every summer, with music, food, and kids jumping off every dock in sight. The smell of barbecue mixes with the clean lake air and pure joy. The State Environmental Department has designated us a model for community conservation. Great blue herons have returned in numbers not seen in decades, their prehistoric calls echoing across water that reflects more than just the sky. It reflects what people can achieve when they choose cooperation over conflict. My consulting business has transformed as well. Instead of chasing corporate contracts, I now help small communities implement technology that brings people together. Databases for volunteer groups, websites for nonprofits, and systems that solve problems instead of creating them. Last month, a community in Tennessee called, facing systematic HOA harassment. Elderly residents were being targeted with fake violations and forced sales. Derek and I drove over with documentation, legal templates, and a step-by-step organizing guide. It turns out that Brenda's playbook isn't unique. It's a systematic scam targeting rural communities across the Southeast. We're working with legislators to make this kind of harassment a felony, ensuring that what we endured can't happen to the next family. This morning, Frank texted, 3 new families moving in this summer. They all heard about our drama-free lake living, Dorothy's making welcome casseroles. I smiled, remembering Uncle Ezra's letter about fighting for what's right. He couldn't have known that his stubborn documentation would lead to healing for everyone involved, including the person who tried to destroy him. The lake reflects a perfect blue sky, disturbed only by a beaver's purposeful wake as it heads toward breakfast. Children's laughter echoes from the Johnson dock, mixing with the call of returning loons. This is what community should sound like. Now, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and share your own HOA horror story. I guarantee some of you have dealt with situations that make Brenda look like a rookie. Your experiences might help someone else who is fighting their own neighborhood dictator. And if you enjoyed watching community organizing and strategic documentation defeat systematic harassment, smash that subscribe button for HOA and hit the notification bell. Next week, I'm exposing the Tennessee property management scam, where one 82-year-old grandmother's refusal to be bullied saved 40 families from financial ruin. Trust me, that story will restore your faith in ordinary people doing extraordinary things when they refuse to stay silent. Remember, bullies count on isolation and ignorance. Community strength and legal knowledge are your best weapons against systematic harassment. And sometimes, the most powerful response to hatred is simply refusing to hate back. Thanks for being part of the End for HOA family. And I'll see you next week when we dive into another battle for justice in suburbia. Until then, keep fighting the good fight. Another day, another HOA drama wrapped up. If this story made you shake your head or pump your fist in victory, smash that like button, share your own HOA experience below, and subscribe so you'll never miss another battle in the burbs.